Hey guys, TechFreckle here again. Today I'm going to go over the display and positioning section of the Learn CSS course. And we're going to start off with the flow of HTML. All right. A browser will render the elements of an HTML document that has no CSS from left to right, top to bottom, in the same order as they exist in the document. This is called the flow of elements in HTML. In addition to the properties that it provides to style HTML elements, CSS includes properties that change how a browser positions elements. These properties specify where an element is located on a page, if the element can share lines with other elements, and other related attributes. In this lesson, you will learn 5 properties for adjusting the position of HTML elements in the browser: position, display, z-index, float, clear. Each of these properties will allow us to position and view elements on a web page. They can be used in conjunction with other styling properties you may know. All right. Position. Take a look at the block level elements in the image below. My awesome website. 800 by 36. Div 300 by 150. Hello world. Learn how to create my own website using HTML and CSS. 800 by 18. And then div 650 by 120. Block level elements in these boxes create a block the full width of their parent elements, and they prevent other elements from appearing in the same horizontal space. Notice the block level elements in the image above take up their own line of space and therefore don't overlap each other. In the browser to the right, you can see block level elements also consistently appear on the left side of the browser. This is the default positions for block level elements. The default position of an element can be changed by setting its position property. The position property can take one of 5 values: static, the default value, it does not need to be specified; relative, absolute, fixed, and sticky. The next few exercises, you'll learn about the values in the list above. For now, it's important to understand that if you favor the default position of an HTML element, you don't need to set its position property. In style.css, add a declaration to the question rule set that sets the position to static. Notice that setting the position static does nothing. That's because static simply refers to the default behavior. All right. Position relative. One way to modify the default position of an element is by setting its position property to relative. This value allows you to position an element relative to its default static position on the website. Although the code in the example above instructs the browser to expect a relative positioning of the green box element, it does not specify where the green box element should be positioned on the page. This is done by accompanying the position declaration with one or more of the following offset properties that will move the element away from its default static position. Top moves the element down from the top, bottom moves the element up from the bottom, left moves the element away from the left side to the right, right moves the element away from the right side to the left. You can specify values in pixels, EMs, or percentages, among others, to dial in exactly how far you need the element to move. It's also important to note that offset properties will not work if the element's position property is the default static. In the example above, the element of green box class will be moved down 50 pixels and to the right 120 pixels from its default static position. The image below displays the new position of the box. So my awesome website, hello world, I'm going to create my website, blah, blah, blah. So it's going top 50, left 120. Offsetting the relative element will not affect the positioning of other elements. All right, so in style CSS, inside, let's just make sure this is gone. Question rule set. Change the position to relative. Okay. And then pixels from the top. So this is for the question. All right, so moved it down. Position absolute. Another way of modifying the position of an element is by setting its position to absolute. When an element's position is set to absolute, all other elements on the page will ignore the element and act like it's not present on the page. The element will be positioned relative to its closest position parent element, while offset properties can be used to determine the final position from there. Take a look at the image below. So we're looking at, okay, this website is in progress. Please come back later. Text is displaced from its static position at the top left corner of its parent container. It has offset property declarations of top 300 and right 0, positioning it 300 pixels down and 0 pixels from the right side of the page. Okay, so set the position inside of the header rule set to absolute. So let's see. Position absolute. Notice how it's removed from the normal flow of the document and covering the welcome section. I don't see that change. Why am I not seeing anything here? Maybe that's why. Didn't reset. Okay, so let's go position absolute. Okay. So welcome bumped up. This got removed from the flow. Okay. When you change the position to absolute, you may have noticed that the header shrunk originally. We'll learn in a later exercise. For now, set the width property of the header to 100%. Okay. Perfect. Okay, that looks like what we were just on before the reset. Perfect. Reset this one too right away. Position fixed. When an element's position is set to absolute, as in the last exercise, the element will scroll with the rest of the documents when a user scrolls. We can fix an element to a specific position on the page, regardless of user scrolling, by setting its position to fixed and accompanying it with the familiar offset properties top, bottom, left, and right. In the example above, the title element will remain fixed to its position no matter where the user scrolls on the page, like in the image below. Top 0, left 0. This technique is often used for navigation bars on a web page. In Style CSS, change the position property inside of the header to fixed. Scroll up and down. All right, it is now stuck. Notice the part of the welcome section is now covered up by the header. That's because when we changed the position of the header to fixed, we removed it from the flow of the HTML document. Let's fix that. Set the position of the welcome element to relative. Oh, is it already? It doesn't have one. So it should move it down. Or no, it doesn't. Okay, why does it change that? Notice the part of the welcome section is now covered up by the header. That's because when we changed the position of the header to fixed, we removed it from the flow of the HTML document. Let's fix that. Okay, so inside the curly braces, why is it on top? I wonder if it just takes precedent. Welcome. Offset the welcome section by 200 pixels. Top. Everything might not be displaying correctly just yet. We'll fix it in later exercise. All right, so it's now down, but stuff's overlapping. Position sticky. Since static and relative positioned elements stay in the normal flow of the document when a user scrolls the page or parent element, these elements will scroll too. And since fixed and absolute position elements are removed from the document flow when a user scrolls, these elements will stay at their specified offset position. Let's reset this. Okay, the sticky value is another position value that keeps an element in the document flow as the user scrolls. but sticks to a specified position as the page is scrolled further. This is done by using the sticky value along with the familiar offset properties, as well as one new one. Okay. In the example above, the box bottom div will remain in its relative position and scroll as usual. When it reaches 250 pixels from the top, it will stick to that position until it reaches the bottom of its parent container, where it will unstick and rejoin the flow of the document. Okay. Interesting. Change the position of the elements with the class question to sticky. Okay, so I want to take a look here. Question is this entire div. This question section. Okay. So question sticky. Oh. Z-index. When boxes on a web page have a combination of different positions, the boxes and therefore their content can overlap with each other, making the content difficult to read or consume. In the example above, the green box element overlaps on top of the blue box element. Okay. The Z-index property controls how far back or how far forward an element should appear on the web page when elements overlap. This can be thought of as depth of elements, with deeper elements appearing behind shallower elements. The Z-index property accepts integer values. Depending on their values, the integers instruct the browser on the order in which elements should be layered on the web page. This example above, we set the blue box position to relative and the Z-index to 1. We change position to relative, because the Z-index property does not work on static elements. The Z-index of 1 moves the blue box element forward because the Z-index value has not been explicitly specified for the green box element, which means it has a default Z-index value of 0. Take a look at the example below. Blue box 1, green box, down from the top, 170 over. Style CSS set the Z-index. Let's make sure. Set the Z-index of the header to 10. So I need to change here. We scroll. Oh, okay. Gotcha. I see now. Inline display. Every HTML element has a default display value that dictates if it can share horizontal space with other elements. Some elements fill the entire browser from left to right, regardless of the size of their content. Other elements only take up as much horizontal space as their content requires and can directly next to other elements. In this lesson, we'll cover 3 values for the display property: inline, block, and inline block. The default display for some elements, such as EM, strong, and A, is called inline. Inline elements have a box that wraps tightly around their content, only taking up the amount of space necessary to display their content and not requiring a new line after each statement. The height and width of these elements cannot be specified in the CSS document. For example, the text of an anchor tag, A, will by default be displayed on the same line as the surrounding text, and it will only be as wide as necessary to contain its content. Inline elements cannot be altered in size with the height or width CSS properties. In the example above, the EM element is inline because it displays its content on the same line as the surrounding content surrounding it, including the anchor tag. This example will display to learn more about inline elements, read MDN documentation. The CSS display property provides the ability to make any element an inline element. This includes elements that are not inline by default, such as paragraphs, divs, and headings. CSS in the example above will change the display of all h1 elements to inline. The browser will render h1 elements on the same line as other inline elements immediately before or after them, if there are any. Let's refresh this bad boy. In index.html, add opening and closing tags. Strong tags around the word welcome. Notice that the element does not move. That's because strong elements are in line, so they can share lines with other elements. So I'm assuming they want it here. So that's not the right spot. What? Okay. Display block. Some elements are not displayed in the same line as the content around them. These are called block level elements. These elements fill the entire width of the page by default, but their width property can also be set. Unless otherwise specified, they are the height necessary to accommodate their content. Elements that are block level by default include all levels of heading elements, H1 through H6, P, div, and footer. For a complete list of block elements, visit the MDN. In the example above, all strong elements will be displayed on their own line with no content directly on either side of them, even though their contents may not fill the width of most computer screens. In index.html, let's reset this. Add a footer element at the bottom of the document right above the closing body tag. Nothing changed. That's because the footer element is empty. Add an H3 element inside. It says, thanks for taking our survey. To improve the appearance of the web page, set the height of the footer to 100 pixels in style CSS. Footer 8x. Okay. Display inline block. The third value for the display property is inline block. Inline block display combines features of both inline and block elements. Inline block elements can appear next to each other, and we can specify their dimensions using the width and height properties. Images are the best example of default inline block elements. For example, the divs below will be displayed on the same line and with the specified dimensions. Let's take a look at the code. So class rectangle, so my me3, rectangle display inline block width height 200 by 300. Okay. There are 3 rectangular divs that each contain a paragraph of text. The rectangle div will all appear inline, provided there's enough space from left to right. With a width of 200 pixels and height of 300, even though the text inside of them may not require 200 by 300 pixels of space. Let's fix the display of the list elements in the menu at the top of the page. Set the display property of list elements to inline block. Set the width to 80 pixels. Now we can reduce the top offset of the welcome section, set it to 50 pixels. Oh. Set the display property of the answer elements to inline block. Size, imagine we'll fix that. Float. So far, you've learned how to specify the exact position of an element using offset properties. If you're simply interested in moving an element as far left or as far right as possible in the container, you can use the float property. The float property is commonly used for wrapping text around an image. Note, however, that moving elements left or right for layout purposes is better suited for tools like CSS Grid and Flexbox, which you'll learn about later on. The float property is often set using one of the values below. Left moves or floats elements as far left as possible. Right moves elements as far right as possible. All right, in the example above, we float the orange section element to the right. This works for static and relative position elements. See the result of the code below. Okay, floated elements must have a width specified, as in the example above, otherwise the element will assume the full width of its containing element and changing the float value will not yield any visible results. Let's reset this real quick, add a declaration to the dot answer that sets the float property to left. Ooh, that's nasty. Okay, the float property can also be used to float multiple elements at once. However, when multiple floated elements have different heights, it can affect their layout on the page. Specifically, elements can bump into each other and not follow other elements to properly move to the left or right. The clear property specifies how elements should behave when they bump into each other on the page. It can take on one of the following values. The left side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. The right side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. Neither side of the element will touch any other element within the same containing element. The element can touch either side. In the example above, all divs on the page are floated to the left side. The element with class special did not move all the way to the left because a taller div blocked its positioning. By setting its clear property to the left, the special div will be moved all the way to the left side of the page. So take a look at the dot answer divs on the web page. They've been floated to the left, but the question divs are touching the answer. Okay. All right, let's fix this. In the question selector, set the clear property to left. So the left side of the question should not touch anything else in its container, so it should drop back down. Okay, perfect. On the second thought, this layout is not looking good. Remove the float property from answer. Wait, what? Okay. Float left. Review layout. Great job. In this lesson, you learned how to control the positioning of elements on a web page. Let's review what you've learned so far. The position property allows you to specify the position of an element when set to relative. An element's position is relative to its default position on the page. Okay, so relative is relative to its default position. Okay, gotta remember that. When set to absolute, an element's position is relative to its closest position parent element. It can be pinned to any part of the web page, but the element will still move with the rest of the documents when the page is scrolled. When set to fixed, an element's position can be pinned to any part of the web page. The element will remain in view no matter what. When set to sticky, an element can stick to a defined offset position when the user scrolls its parent container. The z-index of an element specifies how back or how far forward an element appears on the page when it overlaps other elements. The display property allows you to control how an element flows vertically and horizontally in a document. Inline elements take up as little space as possible, and they cannot have manually adjusted width or height. Block elements take up the width of their container, can have manually adjusted heights. Inline block elements can have set width and height, but they can also appear next to each other and do not take up their entire container width. The float property can move elements as far left or as far right as possible on a web page. You can clear an element's left or right side, or both, using the clear property. When combined with an understanding of the box model positioning, can create visually appealing web pages. So far, we've focused on adding content in the form of text to a web page. In the next unit, you'll learn how to add and manipulate images on a web page. Take some time to experiment with your new knowledge of positioning in Style CSS. When you're done, proceed on to the next unit. All right. Let's just see here. Let's see if there's a quiz. I believe there is. Let's retake it. It looks like I did badly last time. Which of the following position values remove an element from the flow of the HTML document? Fixed. Which of the following CSS properties can be used to set an element's behavior to inline block? This can be display. Complete the statement. An inline block element does not start and cannot be. Oh, what? Inline block element does not. Oh, okay. Yeah, I screwed that one up. I was thinking of something else. How will the rule set affect the card elements? Position relative, top 10 pixels. So, it's default position since it's relative, not absolute. Which of the following is the default position value? Is it not static? Yes. Which of the following values will position an element in relation to the nearest non-static element? Okay. Which of the following values will position an element in relation to the nearest non-static? If it's absolute, complete the statement. An inline element does not start a new line and cannot be sized. That's the one I was thinking of. The Z index will be ignored if an index or if an element is set to which of the following position values. The Z index will be ignored if it's not fixed. No, static. Why is it static? Complete the statement. A block element starts a new line and can be sized. What is the index? How far back or forward? How will the rule set affect the title card? Position is fixed, top 0 pixels. So element 0 pixels from the top of its parent element. Remove title card from the flow and keep it in the same position within the browser, even if the user scrolls. Boom. All right. Did a little bit better than last time. I need to read this. Okay. An inline block element. Okay, yeah. This one, I assumed it was a different question. Like this one, I know the answer for it. The Z index will be ignored if an element is set to which of the following position values. The Z index property is only applicable to positioned elements, meaning those with a position value other than static. Since static elements do not participate in stacking contexts, their Z index is effectively ignored, leading to the correct identification of static as the answer to the question regarding the Z index. To positioned. Okay. All right. I think there is a project next, so we'll see you in the next video.